Hey everyone, this is Kevin the Apptrepreneur. Welcome to the Apptrepreneur Show. We're doing an impromptu live stream video, which means if this video is more than an hour long or somewhere along that lines, the main part of it is going to be in the first 10 to 20 minutes. And then after that, it's just regular talking. So I have been a big proponent for remote work. I truly do think that if you are forcing people to come back into the office, you're living in another age. Like, this is not how we're doing things anymore. We have the technology where for the most part, jobs can be done in the comfort of their own home. I believe there should be a future, especially with these tech companies where everything is cloud-based anyway, where people should be allowed to take their money and live wherever they want. Maybe go on workations. I think that's a great thing. And so far, I have not read too many opinions on why this would be a bad thing. Now, I have discussed articles that push back on remote work, and I have been very honest and clear that I believe these are hit pieces from companies that are really trying to convince the world that it is not a good idea to go back into the office. Like, hey, you missed the social aspects. You missed part of your identity. In fact, there is an article where someone admits that they want to go back to the office for selfish reasons, and that might be worthy of a longer discussion, which is not going to be had here, about whether or not bosses whose identity is wrapped up in going into the office should be foisted onto employees who their worth is not so much tied up into going to the office, but just getting work done and receiving a paycheck. Now, that said, I have finally come across an article that makes not necessarily a good case for not going remote, but definitely a compelling argument for a big backlash that could occur by insisting we all go remote. And in fact, they make such a good point that I believe that if we are to actually introduce legislation to require some form of remote work, there might have to be provisions put in that legislation to prevent something like this from happening. So this article comes to us from Inc., which stands for Incorporated. It's a wonderful website. I really love this. And it's written by Susan Lucas, who's a freelance writer, and she made a very good case right here. Now, I wish I could put it on the screen for you. Unfortunately, I can't, so you're gonna have to listen to me, unfortunately. But the headline is, Holland to make remote work the law. This may backfire. So, here's what the article says. Employees who work at home during the pandemic shutdown seem loath to come back to the office. And why wouldn't they be? Gas is really expensive. No one likes standing in traffic. And of course, even though some of my viewers don't believe this, and in fact they're very vocal that they don't believe this, but COVID-19 infections are on the rise, and there might be another disruption. So there is a reason, there's many reasons why people don't want to go back to the office. And if you hear a little munching sound, that's my chinchilla mini. At the same time, companies want people to come back. The Pew Research Foundation found that 61% of the people working from home were doing so by choice, not because there wasn't an office to go to. On the other hand, Microsoft found that 50% of companies want their employees to return to the office full time. There's a clear clash between what people want and what senior leadership wants. At least one government is listening. And I'm sorry to say it's not ours. That one's my comment, not hers. On July 5th, 2022, the Dutch Parliament voted to require companies to, quote, carefully consider any request for remote work. If the boss denies it, the company will have to explain why under the proposed legislation, which is poised to become law after the Senate approves it. While what happens in Holland may well stay in Holland, American workers looking at this legislation may wonder whether something similar would be a good idea in the U.S. Before joining the lobbying efforts, consider this counterpoint. If you argue that you can do your job 100% remotely, then your boss just might believe you. And if your boss starts to believe you, Your boss may begin to wonder why you're receiving a high Dutch or American salary. If the job can indeed be done from anywhere, then why not Malaysia, India, or the Philippines? You might see where this is going. This is a very classic corporate if you give a mouse a cookie scenario. An HR executive in a global multi-billion-dollar company told me that the pushback on working in the office might have direct repercussions. She explained that when people ask to work at home and receive Silicon Valley wages elsewhere, quote, I always say be careful what you wish for. If I can have you in San Francisco or Iowa, I can hire someone in India. So, this angle doesn't include the whole rug background. Well, we're not worrying about that right now. I mean, I guess I could turn it a little. Sure, why not? Let's do that. But can you be as effective in projects requiring close teamwork if the team is scattered across the globe? Or is it better and easier if you can get together, at least from time to time, or in the same time zone? If proximity doesn't matter for most jobs, why should employers continue to pay high wages? If everyone truly can work anywhere, this is the next logical step. And the next question in this article is, what if wages drop? New York, California, and Illinois saw and are continuing to see dramatic drops in population as people leave these high cost of living areas. While Texas and Florida gained the most people from these moves, they weren't the only place to see growth. In the past, when people moved, they had to find new jobs and local wages. But many of these people took advantage of the work-from-home policies of the COVID era. They took their expensive state salaries and moved to places where they could get more bang for their buck. It seemed like a great idea, but then Silicon Valley pushed back, with Mark Zuckerberg floating the idea of smaller salaries for people who moved away. Suddenly, talent pools opened up. If you didn't have to hire geographically close people, you had more options. For people in high-paid jobs, it seems like a great deal. High salary, low cost of living, big house, and cash left over to buy a Tesla or to battle high gas prices. And right now, wages are climbing in many areas. But what if we end up in a recession? Hiring freezes and layoffs are already underway. Netflix, Tesla, Carvana, Peloton, and Zulily had layoffs in 2022. This indicates that a slowdown in wage growth may happen. Since inflation is already high, this could be devastating to a lot of people. And then, what if wages drop? What if no one is willing to pay New York City wages for people who work in Idaho? And then, what if no one is willing to pay Idaho wages because they can get the same skills out of India even cheaper? Here's the final argument to the article. Convincing people that remote work is the future may not be the best idea. There are plenty of jobs that you can't do from home. You still can't fill a tooth, fix a clogged sink, or stock grocery shelves from a home office. But dental offices can have a remote receptionist, and a robot can bring new towels to your hotel door. If employees thoroughly convince the bosses that they don't need to be physically around, bosses may just believe them and start hiring cheaper employees. There's no need to go through the arduous H-1B visa hassle if you can just set up shop in another country to begin with. Maybe instead of focusing on why it's not essential to be together, employees should start thinking about why it's important to be in proximity with one another. Hybrid work is the best of both worlds. Employees get time at home and in the office, and perhaps managers won't be so interested in hiring people willing to work for a lot less. So, here's the thing. I have to admit, this article makes some very valid points. Because if there's one thing that's pretty consistent about any corporation's desire, aside from their desire to make money, it's their desire to pay people as little as possible. You have probably worked at a job where when you say, I'm going to take my 15-minute break, they go like this. Okay, it begins. Of course, it's going to take you a couple minutes to get to the break area, and if you get stopped on your way to the work area, your boss wants you to stop and help those people. But when they go like this, you're on the clock. It doesn't matter if it takes 2 to 3 minutes to get to the break area. It doesn't matter if it takes 2 to 3 minutes to get back from the break area. That break is paid for. Therefore, you better not be back more than 1 minute late, or else there's going to be problems. Now, would it really kill the company to let you take those 6 minutes to get to and from the break area? Maybe you have a 21-minute break. You have 2 of those a day. That's not a big deal. They're not really losing any money, but they feel like they're losing money. So therefore, they put a leash on it. They force you to really commit to the time that you have. And they don't want to pay you for any minutes of work that you're not doing. I remember when I worked at Fry's Electronics, there were days when people would be sent home because they'd be standing around. Now there's no customers around, but they're like, why am I paying you to stand around and do nothing? So I always made it a point to be doing something. Whether it looks like I was sorting the shelves, I don't know how many times I changed the DVD department at Fry's or the video game departments. I made sure to keep moving because they would send me home. And I do believe that there are some companies that are willing to look at other countries and say, well, hey, if people can do this job remotely, why don't I hire someone from India? Why don't I hire someone from the Philippines? They'll work for a lot less money. I mean, customer service has been doing that for a long time. Why can't we do it here? Now, one of the things that companies are, of course, missing is when you outsource customer service to another country, the customer service is notoriously poor. Have you ever noticed that the customer service over the phone at Apple and Amazon is so good? And yeah, I'm going to compliment Amazon on something. There's a reason for that. It's because they don't outsource their customer service. The people are in America, they speak English, and they can help. But think of the dozens of other places that you call customer service, and you get someone on the phone that sounds like Apu from The Simpsons, and they don't really understand what you're saying. And they ask you these really basic questions, like, I'm not going to do an accent, but it's like, have you tried plugging in the computer? Have you tried turning it on? It's a very common, no, it's not. We're calling you because it won't turn on. We're calling you for this. I remember one time calling Microsoft customer service to get my Surface fixed, and the accent was so thick, the English so broken, that it was a nightmare. But you know, a call to Nintendo customer support a week later, and ironically it was for a GameCube, which hadn't been in production for a while because it wouldn't turn on. I called Nintendo, and it was someone in America, and not only did I say, the GameCube won't turn on, it just beeps. The guy said, okay, it sounds silly, but have you tried unplugging the controller and then turning it on? I did that, and it turned on. And the guy explained, well, then your controller's wire is exposed. If there's a exposed wire with a Nintendo controller, the system has a safety mechanism to not turn on. That was fascinating, by the way. Nintendo's great at making their products. They're really bad at preserving games, but they really do make good products. And I just know that if you have a native customer service employee that is in America, that speaks your language clearly and fluently, you will have better customer service. Now, I believe that mentality is also going to work better with remote work. Because here's the thing. Let's say a company starts thinking like, well, maybe someone from the Philippines can do this job better. Let's ship our accounting business. Let's ship our, our writers overseas. God forbid, let's ship our proofreading jobs overseas. Yeah, you will save money, but you will also get what you pay for. Do you really want to hire people to do work with your finances from people who the dollar is not their natural currency? Do you want to have foreigners design spreadsheets when they don't have the experience that people with college degrees can provide? What about proofreaders? One of the jobs that's actually been remote for a very long time for the most part is proofreading. I mean, most companies do have proofreaders and they can work remotely. You gonna ship those people, those jobs, I should say, overseas to people whose English is maybe their third language? Maybe it's not even their second language. Maybe it's their third language. So I believe companies would get a much worse performance with work. But then the question comes, would it be poor enough that they would regret it? There's also another problem with shipping jobs overseas, and I believe that if this started to happen, then yes, the government would probably have to step in and tell these companies what they could and couldn't do with the hiring process. Because once you start shipping those jobs overseas, I mean, we like to act like, oh, the companies will just do this. But you know what that also does? It means you're sending wages out of the country. It means that the local economy, wherever you are, is not being supported. And of course, one of the problems with the autonomous future, and this is why I finally had to block that guy who wants robots to do everything, he wants the future. You fire everyone from their job, no one's going to have money to buy anything. Great. Your robots are driving your Ubers around, and your robots are setting up the appointments at the dental office. Who's going to have money to take those Ubers? Who's going to have money to go to the dentist? Because who's going to buy the groceries? Like, this money doesn't stay in America, and you aren't hiring people, so you're not contributing to the local economy. Now, I am fully aware that most companies, that is not their concern. They want to save as much money as possible. So that's why if this starts to happen, I do believe that Congress would have to act and say, you cannot do this. I think there's already been a lot of pushback from Congress, and even some companies are willingly starting to bring jobs back into the country because they're starting to see what happens where you send the jobs overseas and the damage it's done to our economy, not to mention our supply chains, when other countries, which we rely upon, basically say, we got to take care of ourselves first. We can't help you out. So here's the thing. I think that there probably will need to be legislation written, and I believe legislation should be written to protect work from home, but it's going to have to take some of these things into account. It's going to have to say, okay, first of all, if we're going to make, first of all, you have to consider remote work if that job can be done full time. And if you deny it, you have to explain why. And so if you say well, we believe someone overseas can do the job better, or we just like the community of being in the office, that's not going to fly. You can't deny someone remote work for that. But you're also going to have to make it clear, not only do you have to consider remote work, you cannot ship those jobs overseas. They must stay in America. And heck, as a result of that law, maybe some of the customer service jobs would come back to America. Bring those jobs back. They're not great jobs, but almost anyone can do them. Make this a nationwide economy again. Doesn't matter where they're living, the money's coming to Americans. Or Canadians, because, they're basically our brothers right there. And then the third thing is going to be, and by the way, you have to pay them the wages of wherever you live. Now, this might cause a disruption with the food chain, if you will, in the sense that once this is passed, it wouldn't surprise me if Facebook and Microsoft and Twitter and Uber, if they decide to get out of San Francisco, out of Silicon Valley, it's like, hey, why don't we build our main office in Kansas? You know, wages are low there. Property's cheap. Let's do that. That's a possibility, and I fully acknowledge that would probably happen. But I think that would eventually work itself out, because you know what would happen if like all these other states became home to these big companies? Well, maybe those wages would have to go up. Maybe, I kind of would like to think that there would be a little bit of pushback. If Facebook wants to move to Kentucky because wages are cheap over there, well, that's great. You can do that. But what's the side effect of that? Well, you might have programmers who it's looking at Facebook, and now Facebook is very, very clearly, they're getting wages that are lower, whereas these other companies that are housed in New York and California, they pay more. It might even force companies to even match wages. And heck, if companies start moving out of state and people start moving out of state, maybe some of these states will become cheaper too. I mean, I don't necessarily want the California economy to collapse. That would obviously be bad for us if it did. At the same time, if it cooled a little bit where, let's say landlords start to realize like, hey, maybe you can't charge $2,900 a month for a one-bedroom apartment because people could rent a two-bedroom apartment over in this state for $1,400 or $1,200 and they get to keep their high-paying California job. I don't know. They might have to incentivize people to stay in California. What do you think? So, anyway, I think this article makes a very, very good point in that, yes, if remote work is to be legislated and required in America, these loopholes will have to be taken care of. And I don't think that it's in the company's best interest to start considering outsourcing these jobs because I think they're going to get a much poorer quality of service. I mean, I don't want to stereotype or anything like that. But again, do you really want someone in the Malaysias to be proofreading books and magazines? Do you want someone from the Philippines writing about fashion in New York City? The thing about remote work is that, and I suspect that this person writes this is a pro-office person. I believe she wants to go back to the office because, again, one of her sentences, she says hybrid work is the best of both worlds. Employees get time at home and in the office. And yet, that's always like the big question, well, why do employees need to be in the office? You've not been able to adequately answer that for the most part. So, basically what this article is it's a threat. It's a threat like, hey, if you convince bosses that these jobs can be done anywhere, they may believe you. And I agree. But then I also believe that laws and legislation can be written to not only protect the United States economy, but to protect the quality of the product and all that jazz. I think we're going to have to figure it out. But here's the thing. It's very abundantly clear that the vast majority of people do want to work remotely. Now, as this goes on and as I continue to talk about it, I do think the most logical solution to all of this is probably the simplest one. They're just going to make it very clear whether the job is remote or not. And because there are people who do want to go to the office. There are some people, they don't want to do work at home. They're not like me. They want to go in the office. For those people, they can apply for those jobs that go to the office and they will fill those jobs. And the people who want to work remotely, they will work remotely. And I wish companies would start trying to think about how they can best attract both types of people to cover every aspect of their business rather than thinking of ways to stick it to the people who just simply don't want to pay the high gas prices and commute to the office. That's what I think. Anyway, that's the story. That's the video. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Do you think that this could be a real concern if they manage to convince companies to do this? I would love to know. So comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe, and as always, flame responsibly, reaching over to turn off. And oh yeah, spoiler alert for everyone. I will talk about the Uber files. I just haven't talked about it yet because I wanted to wait for someone to say something first. That person did, and now I think we can talk about it. Anyway, thumbs up if you like the video. Take care, everyone.